Yet, but we can feel the energy. No doubt this energy is here. You can already hear some chanting outside our studio. A lot of the delegates singing past us. What are you making of today so far?
I think a lot of anxiety as well. You can imagine that all these delegates are trying to intensely now convince others on how to vote, but a lot of anxiety. You don't know in which camp it will go. And for me, it's always been a two-faction camp. You know, the Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma and the Cyril Ramaphosa. But a lot of anxiety, especially with the court cases as well. I think that is a bit, throwing off the NEC, and it shows that they have underperformed in terms of planning for this conference, because they should have dealt with disputes prior to this national conference.
All right, Melanie, you got an understanding, being a former ANC person yourself. What's happening in the NEC right now? What kind of debates are taking place, and is it going to be based on the factions within the ANC itself?
Yeah, well, I mean, at first we just have to say this is so ANC. Like we were all laughing when Zizi Kotwa this morning said we're going to start punctually at 9 o'clock. And we all went, since when? Is that going to happen? I mean, most people are thinking now more closer to 2 o'clock that would really be kicked up, hopefully a little bit earlier. And part of the reason for delaying is, of course, the NEC is having this emergency meeting. Look, NEC meetings take a long time, especially when it's full NECs, and that's what we'll have now. It'll be a full extended NEC. So about 100 people there, if you include some of the provincial executives there. And of course you need to do it properly, you need to convene, you need to have an agenda, and then as it goes in the ANC, everybody gets a chance to talk, everybody who wants to talk, because the ANC still very much goes on a consensus agreement. And it's a tough nut to crack this morning. They need to steer now very carefully between, on the one hand, not letting the conference disintegrate or even possibly collapse because of these legal issues. On the other hand, not to just include people and then in the end sit with a contested election. So somewhere in between those two poles, they now have to steer the ship this morning. And I'm guessing that's going to take a long time. And yes, of course, because we know on the one hand that it is the Cyril Ramaphosa guys that have been making the court cases and winning them. And on the other hand, of course, that means that Dlamini Zuma, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, is most probably going to lose, maybe around 150 to 200 votes because of these court cases. So, of course, the two sides are going to fight for their positions to try and, on the one hand, either sustain this and on the other hand, not letting this happen.
Is there a referee inside an NEC meeting like this?
Well, this is the problem with consensus. This is why it takes time. Usually what happens in my experience is with all ANC meetings, everybody gets a chance to talk. There is a lot of engagement, etc., etc. Finally, somebody will get up and say, to summarize, comrades, and then there would be either sort of a general acknowledgement that is a consensus position. I mean, usually when they can't find consensus, the tendency in the ANC would be to revert back to a subcommittee or a smaller group, etc., etc. The problem is you can't easily do this here this morning. They could still refer it to a subcommittee, start, then come back, that kind of thing, and that might happen. But it's difficult to see. They need to actually deal with this issue now.
We talk about, and quite interestingly, you mention that due to these court cases, we see Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma's camp losing about 150 to 200 votes. Now, if we'd looked at previous conferences, that would have been, okay, that's fine, whatever, those are just 200 votes. During this particular race, we have constantly be calling this neck on neck. This is too close to call. I mean, there are just a couple of votes separating these two delegates. Now, what is going to happen? Because, I mean, those votes are crucial and vital votes. Will this be decided in the courts, or how is this going to all pan out, do you predict?
Look, there are definitely crucial votes, like you correctly say, and as Busiosa said, this is why the tensions are so high at the moment. It's because it's so close, this race. It's not an easy race at this stage to predict. We all have our senses, but still. And so, yes, I mean, it's exactly what you said. Previously, I think the closest it ever got was about a 2,000 vote difference, between the person who won and the next person. Now we're talking about a couple of hundred votes. My view is, of course, that if it gets too close, so if there is 100 difference, for example, or even maybe 200, it's going to become incredibly contested. Even though, strictly speaking, if the person wins with one vote, they win. But can you imagine, at this kind of level? So I think there is a very high likelihood, together with this appetite that suddenly has developed in the ANC by everybody to sue everybody inside the ANC, there's an appetite for court cases now. So I think we're very likely going to see something contested.
We'll see, is it that close? Sometimes I think the media and analysts and people can create a narrative that gets a life all by itself. The nomination process delivers nominations, and that's all it does really at the end of the day, so we can't read too much into that. How did we get to the point where it's become accepted that this race is too close to call?
Well, certainly, look, what we're reading in the media is that it's very close. For me, it's not really neck and neck, and I'm not predicting or saying that who would win this one, but certainly the impact of the court's outcome is slightly insignificant for me. We're talking about at least 5,240 delegates that were meant to attend this conference, and if you have 27 plus 27, that's about 54, as Melanie has already said, and also just a few branches implicated in the Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma camp. So it's not a big significance, but she has. Well, her campaign is obviously tainted now, and the brand ANC as a whole, I think.
It's something that interests me about that, though, is that I think we are sitting with a slight bias when we interpret this. I think if this case was done by, remember, all these cases have been coming from the Cyril Ramaphosa camp. If we have seen this coming from the Zuma camp and we got the same outcome, I think a lot of the media analysts would have interpreted as desperation on the Zuma camp. I'm a little bit worried about the confirmation bias that we're seeing developing, that this is a huge victory for Cyril Ramaphosa. It is to some extent. I agree that the numbers are not actually that significant, and even if it means 200 votes that are moving away from Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, again, if you think about encouraging, motivating, bribing people you only need to swing 100 of those to, back again. So I'm not so worried about the numbers, but I'm also worried that we should not overplay this as a big victory for Ramaphosa either.
Can I just move our attention away from the race right now to this big announcement that was made by our president this morning? The story saying that President Jacob Zuma announcing free higher education for poor and working class students, basically, in a nutshell, saying those currently enrolled in TVET colleges or university students from South African households with a combined annual income of up to 350,000 Rand by the 2018 academic year will now receive free higher education. What was your reaction when you automatically heard this? I mean, it came through this morning. I don't think any of us were really expecting this, and yet this was the start of what we expect to be the last of President Jacob Zuma's day as the president of the ANC. Talk to us about this.
I mean, that was a surprise of an announcement. It came as breaking news. I think it's very opportunistic of the president to do this precisely at this time. You have the minister giving his business address to businesses at the business breakfast, and on the other hand we have him announcing free higher education. It's not well thought through. I think it's very opportunistic. I don't know what impact it will have on the national conference itself, but obviously it can go either way. Firstly, it could be that because it's not well thought through, he's throwing whoever might win, which is Cyril right now, seemingly leading, the pack with the two slates. So maybe throwing him under the bus, because there's essentially, they had said there's no money for free higher education. So there's not a lot of detail about this. And I mean, the national conference is the one that is the highest decision body making. So it has to decide on these issues. So I think it was really It's a big surprise.
Yeah, comes as a big surprise, and yet there are some big celebrations one can imagine now from students that have been fighting for this, and families that certainly cannot afford this at a time where financially things are very, very difficult. However, the commission that looked into this, the IHEA Commission, had recommended, and there were recommendations, that this is not feasible for South Africa right now. Melanie, your views? I mean, this is it's a difficult pill to swallow, and yet is it vital?
Look, first of all, I think we should welcome it for the effect that it will have for many students in this country, a huge percentage of students in this country. And something needed to be done. There was clearly no way politically, but also from a human perspective, that this current situation could go on.
I'm going to ask you to pause just for a second, because our reporter Ntakwana is standing by with Tokyo Sexwale, I believe. Ntakwana?
Yes, Peter, I have here with me the former Premier of Gauteng and former NEC member Tokyo Sexwale, and he's one of the people who have arrived here as delegates start arriving and of course start showing who it is that they want to take over the leadership of the ANC. I just want to ask him very few questions. The first one being, what are your expectations from this conference?
I would expect the conference to start well and to end up well. I would expect the conference to take good resolutions, because people usually forget that the conference is about the resolutions. Those resolutions are about the life of our people. I would expect that a leadership is elected that can be equal to the task of good governance and understanding that you are servants of the people and not their bosses.
Now, we are here at the moment. We ought to have started at 9 a.m. The NEC is locked in talks because probably those court cases that happened yesterday, the run-up to this election was marred by divisions. But also we remember that back at the Morogoro conference, it was actually held because at the time there were members of the ANC who wanted Oliver Tambo to step down, and he's then called a consultative conference. But we are here now where some members are saying, no, the leader should not step down, and so on and so forth. How do we go from all of this post-conference to unite the party?
Well, you are referring to Morogoro. Among some of the most disciplined people there was Chris Hani. And Morogoro is different because it was able to rise above these problems. And 30 years of Oliver Tambo abroad held the ANC together. We are falling apart right now. The essence of what is happening with the court cases this morning should be understood in the following light, the way I see them. Corruption has become a standard thing in South Africa. We are beginning to want to take the first position in the world. From the president's office right down to the councillor, through ministers, premiers, MECs and so on. These are all printed, so I'm not composing anything here. And corruption has found itself in state-owned organizations. SABC, you have dealt with things here. SAA, you have dealt with things. Transnet, ESCOM. Now, before corrupt people can put their hands in the till of, say, ESCOM or Transnet, they must corrupt the governing party first. So the essence of what we are seeing is the corruption of the ANC. Once you corrupt its processes, not money, processes, you corrupt its regulations, its procedures. You destroy that. When a branch is supposed to meet, it doesn't correct. When it's supposed to be correcting, people have run away, they undermine. Once you have finished off the ANC internally, then you can go and steal, because you create that as a platform. The result today is that ANC people are standing up, and they can only go not to a branch BGM and so on where they're defeated. They go to courts. They go to courts. Now the whole thing, instead of having been corrected at a lower level, is spilling out onto the center of the conference floor, where conference cannot begin because the judges now are in control of the situation. So what we are seeing about corruption, I'm saying corruption of money is one thing, but corruption of the ANC processes is so bad that our people now have decided the only way I can correct that is through the process of the law. And luckily we have a constitution, but I hope that everything becomes okay, and that it's all resolved. It's very difficult. I hope it's all resolved. But we're all coming here for the first time. I'm coming to a conference of the ANC where I am shaking because you do not know whether we'll start. If we start, whether we will finish. But we are praying and holding tight that it goes well.
That is Tokyo Sexwale, former Premier of Gauteng, but also former NEC member, saying that this is the first time he comes to an ANC conference where he's actually afraid whether the conference will start. We've seen it in provinces, with provincial general councils, with even provincial elective conferences, and these conferences would start late or probably way into the night because of the legal challenges that were possible. And he's talking about that, saying that this is the same situation that we're facing here, which is why the NEC is locked in that meeting. Peter and Lien.
Takwana, thanks very much indeed, and some very sobering thoughts there from Tokyo Sexwale. The one that struck me is that, you know, I've been to these many times, and for the first time I'm scared, and that's quite a thing for someone who spent time on Robben Island.
I mean, who wouldn't be scared? You know, I suppose this conference is highly contested. What would most likely to happen, I'm thinking of Polokwane 2008, you know, with the splinter. So it's this one big conferences where it will determine the future of the ANC going into the national elections as well. So it's quite very important, and the ANC goes into this completely divided. I mean, there's factions and they are in denial of these factions, and there's so much court battles going on of ANC people against the same ANC people. So for me it's very concerning. It's worrisome. It should be worrisome for this ANC itself.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who had presidential aspirations himself. Last time out in Mangaung, Cyril Ramaphosa won with 3,000 votes. Tokyo only got 463. Have we seen him go past his potential now? He's just going to be an ordinary delegate going forward?
I think so. I mean, it's interesting to listen to him. He's always sounded a bit like Madiba, but as his voice is getting a little bit older, he sounds more and more like Madiba. If you actually listen to the way he speaks, the way he pauses, he phrases. I've always liked him, but I think we can accept that his political career, most probably in terms of very senior positions, are over, and that he's busy now, with business again. But I think the issue about being scared, absolutely. I mean, I'm scared as well. I think this is, and I don't scare easily. And I'm very worried. I'm worried for the ANC, and I'm worried for the country, and I'm worried about that the centre must hold, and a lot can go wrong, in the next few days. This is very important, and there's so much at stake here.
And also it's the issue of security. I think, with the high security, with the conference that happened in the Eastern Cape, there's the fear of people being unruly. It's democracy, but unfortunately with democracy you cannot shepherd it. You cannot tell people how to vote and what to do. So it's a democratic process that still needs to play out for itself. But the high security means that, there's a concern that violence might also break out.
Yeah. Well, let's just fill you in on what's been happening today, and of course what to expect now here from NASREC. We have been expecting that it would start at 9 o'clock this morning, but of course there has been this delay because of the emergency NEC meeting that has been on since the early hours of this morning. You can see the media now have been asked to gather in the room there. This is the media room where announcements are being made, and we're expecting Mantashe to be coming out very, very soon, hopefully to brief the media on the post-National Executive Committee briefing. So let's just wait and see. As soon as that happens, we will cut out of this and go live to that briefing and find out what has come out of the NEC meeting and what time everything will begin. It's already 2 hours delayed, but who knows how much longer it'll be delayed. But that's something that we are here waiting for, and certainly we'll bring it to you live. We've got our reporters all over NASREC and around the country as well, but certainly this is the hub of it all. And Takwana is just around the corner from us, and she of course is being joined by a host of guests, just having finished a conversation with Tokyo Sexwale. Let's see who her next guest is now. Takwana, over to you.
Yeah, and I don't have a guest, but I just wanted to give you a sense, and our viewers, of how big this is in terms of media attention. I'm sure that you've seen us as SABC. We have brought television, we brought radio, we brought digital here, but also other media houses too both local, provincial, regional, international, they're here. So I expect that from anywhere in the world where people are who are interested in knowing what's happening here at NASREC, they're able to do that, as you can see, apart from those who have now rushed to that media briefing, that's going to happen any moment now. But as you can see that all television, a lot of television stations here and radio stations covering this particular story, and of course giving it to the world, because as we say, this is the moment that the ANC has to elect a leader that will ensure that it wins the 2019 elections. Leanne?
Thanks very much, Ntukwane. So, Mantashe has been spotted. I'm already seeing a lot of visuals of him talking to the media, and expected to come in and give us an update as to whether the NEC meeting has ended. And there he is, about to take his seat and begin as well. Zizi Kodwa is by his side.
All right. Well, let's cross into that room and just see. All right. So. That's the national spokesperson, Zizi Kodwa, who's been very confident at the beginning of this week, saying that we've been planning this for 4 years and it's going to run smoothly, and anybody who thinks that they can be out of order, we're going to manage them, and they'll be very, very disappointed if they try and misbehave. And just to give you a sense of just how big this event is, as I said, more than 5,000 delegates itself, but in terms of the media and the media interest from across the globe, I believe they got something in the order of over 7,000 media applications to cover this particular story. So it has huge global implications, huge global interest as well.
Yeah. During the media, I beg your pardon, during the presidential gala dinner last night, listening to them reciting numbers and basically saying that they had to refuse a lot of the media accreditation, because had it been that they gave everybody their accreditation, there would be 2 media to 1 delegate. That's how big it was. So yeah, you I think are getting a sense of the media interest behind all of this. International media, local media, media from the continent, you name it, they are here, they are gathered. This is being covered on every single platform, and I mean, not to mention what the SABC alone is doing with television, radio, online. It is here, it is being covered. There is not a thing that you are going to miss if you stay tuned to the SABC.
All right, you know, there's all this speculation that people are going to be canvassed, and perhaps that this announcement that we've heard just now might influence. But when I see those delegates on the floor there, they look like people who know exactly how they're going to vote. They've made up their mind already. And I wonder if you feel the same way, Busi and Melanie.
That's how it looks like to me, you know. If you look at the provinces in particular, you can see those provinces such as KZN and Limpopo, KZN, Free State, which was not very evident. I did not see them a lot, but the provinces that have always been supporting Cyril Ramaphosa, or where he's got most of the votes currently, I think they actually supporting that anti-Zuma. So it's become 2 camps. It's either a pro-Zuma and anti-Zuma. And currently, the whole change means anti-Zuma. We're tired of Zuma and we want change, which Cyril Ramaphosa is the face for that. And on the other hand, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is seen as carrying the legacy of the Zuma, unfortunately.
And she spent a lot of her time trying to distance herself from that legacy, but it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It's a very difficult one to do. And the big fault line in the ANC's process is this fact of a secret individual ballot for delegates. And there's in a way it makes it slightly problematic that you have this lengthy process that now has gone through numerous courts, etc., etc. But ultimately, when that person walks into the ballot box, nobody knows unless he or she says what they voted for. And that's why even, the singing is always gives us some sense of indication. But of course, a lot can still happen before that, and you don't know what happened on the journeys here, etc., and last night and in the parties and that kind of thing. I think Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma will forever struggle to shed that thing. I mean, she could have done things like maybe drop the Zuma surname. She didn't do that. But I think I think it's because they are still personally very close. I think they're not only civilized, I think they're very close to one another. You know, for her it's slightly unfortunate, because I think also from a woman's perspective and a gender perspective, it's problematic that somebody is consistently tied to an ex-husband, you know, not just a husband. And they've been divorced a very long time. But of course, you can't deny that there is a link, that they share children, that she is to some extent still the matriarch of the extended group of Zuma children, you know. So I think one can't deny that, and I think also ideologically she has never distanced herself from the Zuma sort of thinking and the Zuma ideology. She has sort of moved away from the corruption. She has tried to say, I'm not part of that. And remember, she didn't want the Premier League to nominate her originally. She said she would go with the Women's League, not the Premier League. Ironically, then, of course, Patabile Dlamini Zuma has then encountered the SASSA crisis, which then put her again in difficult space, Dlamini Zuma in a difficult space, because she was so closely aligned to her. But so she has tried to pull back on that a little bit, but ideologically, in terms of policy, etc., I think she's too closely aligned. And the bottom line is she cannot win unless she wins on the back of the Premier League provinces. And then, of course, she's indebted to them.
And Melanie speaks of ideology. I think for me, regardless of who wins, you know, the ANC policies are most likely going to remain the same. So the difference would be on personalities as to the extent of how this person would be able to implement that policy. But generally, regardless of who emerges as the new president of the ANC, the policies are still remain the same.
Supposed to be, yeah.
Okay, so I suppose that the next coming days is going to be trying to unpack. I suppose people are busy trying to think, okay, if the slate does come through, who then becomes this minister, who then becomes this? I suppose this is, it may be too early for us, but at the back of one's mind, that's already a conversation that's probably happening behind the scenes.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. I think that, you know, I'll just make an example of the Premier of Mpumalanga, David Mabuza, for instance, talking about unity. I think he was trying to play his cards very safe. And Gwede keeps reiterating that there is no unity on the ballot paper. So they use
I'm going to have to interrupt you. The press conference has started, and this, of course, is an update by the SG Gwede Mantashe and Zizi Kodwa, the spokesperson. Let's find out what they have to say.
An update from our meeting of the NEC. I must just indicate that we will do something very unusual we have never done at Lutul House. We will not allow questions to the briefing, just to update you on the latest, because he has to rush to, he will explain. He's going somewhere to UJ to join other comrades there. Comrade SG?
The first thing is you must tell journalists to stop making me a joke and say, we don't hear him. He says, how. Thank you very much for your presence here. We had a special NEC which was urgent to deal with the 3 court judgments that were given yesterday. That's what we met about. So that we must ensure that we don't do anything that will contaminate the national conference. So the decision taken there is that it's the Free State, it's KZN, and then Bujanala. All the structures that are nullified will not be voting delegates at conference. Okay, there will not be the delegates to conference. We're not going to try any idea that will actually contaminate conference. Branches that are cited in cases both in the Free State and Bujanala will not vote at conference. Will not even allow them to vote with a different color code. They will not vote. We'll keep them, they are here already as observers to conference and invitees to conference. But they will not be participating in conference, but if you are here, you are an invitee, you are a participant, you can participate in the discussion, but they will not vote on any matter. That is the decision. Other issues will be discussed by the various provinces beyond this conference. That include matters of looking at the judgment, study it properly, is there any room for appeal, and all those things. As I said yesterday, for example, if there are two processes, for example, of PGMs, that are for the regional conference, and then there are separate PGMs for the national conference, and then you say branches will not participate in the conference. We think that it's a wrong interpretation of the Constitution, but will not take a risk to say we're defying. They must continue. They will not be participating in this conference as voting delegates. That's what we've agreed. We've finished registration. We're now at the tail end registering Tshwane. Yeah, we're registering Tshwane. Every province has been registered. Every region has been registered. We are now registering Tshwane. And we said, instead of putting pressure on everybody, we'll start at 2. We'll start the conference at 2, so that we don't put undue pressure on everybody running around, have a conference, we can't even adopt credentials. We want to table the credentials up front to conference. That is where we are. That's why it says, I will go somewhere else, I will go to the registration center again to check if things are still on track. That's what we do. We want to run a good conference. That's it. When I retire as Secretary General, I must be a very happy one in terms of having run a good conference. All of us now are called outgoing. You were talking about hopefuls all the time. There are no hopefuls now. There are people who are nominated, so they are candidates. So there are no hopefuls, they are candidates now. And all of us are outgoing, officially so. We're counting hours, by the way. Thank you very much. Zizi.
On behalf of the outgoing spokesperson, thank you very much, SG. We'll brief you later today. Thanks very much.
Any questions?
All right, so it was short and sweet, but very to the point and very significant. So those provinces that have been contested, the Free State, KZN and Bojanala in the Northwest, well, they are just going to be
observers.
Yeah, non-participant. They cannot participate in any voting processes. So the calculations may have been done, but let's get our analysts to unpack their immediate reactions. Let's start with you, Busi. Perhaps not too surprising because of the nature of the judgments and where they came from. These are courts of law.
Yes, I think it's very